Hi, Ty. This is Eric Wilkie and Joel Betts, and we're here with Sumanth Kaja, Dr. Kaja.
Hello.
Hi, who I think you're currently at, is it Columbia? You're currently at
Yep.
Columbia?
Yep, that's right. I'm between Columbia's main campus and the Allen Hospital right now.
Okay. And undergrad and med school at Cornell,
Mm-hmm.
residency, emergency medicine residency, Bellevue.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was your path to emergency medicine?
It was definitely circuitous to say the least. So when I finished college, my direction and focus was more on economic policy, within trying to understand how we can use policy and align incentives to expand access to care. So I spent a number of years working in Uganda and China first in various projects. So initially in Uganda, I was working with community health centers, HIV
Yeah.
clinics, community health organizations on basically, initially I was trying to evaluate the efficacy of international aid programs and trying to understand what some of the unintended consequences were. But I quickly transitioned away from the research world towards recognizing some gaps in care, which had to do with the lack of medical records, basic arithmetic help, medication reminders. This is back in 2010 or so. So a lot of my interest kind of shifted towards helping some of the organizations over there develop technology infrastructure
Yeah.
to make sure their patients could get better access. Developed SMS notification systems. We built basic medical record using Microsoft Access databases locally on computers. Found ways to output records to one-page PDFs so patients could take it to quaternary care centers or tertiary care centers when they had complications or need to get more advanced care. So it was kind of work like that.
Were you in Kampala?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I worked in Kampala. I lived there for about a year total.
Wow. Yeah. I've been to Uganda, I think 6 times.
Oh, wow. Okay. Where? What took you there?
Mostly Kampala, and it was just some volunteer medical work.
Yeah,
So-
it's such a beautiful city. I really miss it. I haven't been back now since 2013 or so, but I would really love to make my way back.
Yeah.
I sit on the board of a foundation that does stuff there in Uganda, Liberia, and Guatemala. Right now, we're getting into a few other areas, but I haven't been over there personally yet. But
Yeah.
it's one of the what you say is makes a lot of sense. You know, you go, you swoop in, you're there for 2 weeks, you see a bunch of patients. There's really no medical records. And you're doing good while you're there, but how does that transition to long-term care? What if they need follow-up? What if they need... So that's one thing we've been finding is difficult in a lot of rural areas is like, how do you get that continuity? You know, say you need someone to get to a tertiary center, like how does that happen? And once they get there, what do they tell? You know, you're talking about someone that may not even speak the same language. How do they communicate that? So that's great. That work's really important.
Yeah, it was fun. I think I got lucky to really plug into a group of local organizations doing important work, and just kind of tried to help fill little holes in what they were doing, and then started doing training for some other similar centers. I think there's an infinite number of problems and things to work on over there, but it was kind of my launch into understanding where technology really meets care access questions.
Yeah.
And it got me excited about like this whole other wave of work that I just didn't know exist. And it actually pulled me away from like pursuing an academic economics path towards more programmatic development work. So that was a ton of fun.
Awesome.
Yeah. From there, I made my way. Sorry, go ahead.
No. So then from there, from the economic side, you get drug into the medical side.
Yeah. I mean, that actually took a while. After Uganda, I moved to China for a few years, where I was doing a lot of like economic research work, basically, for a mentor of mine who is very interested and working with the last Minister of Health and team over there on understanding healthcare reform policy. And some of the questions I was very interested in was saying, well, there's there was a number of questions I was very interested in, but some of my research was very much focused on a lot of domestic migrants into large cities like Beijing or Shanghai who come in as laborers, cleaners, nannies, whatever it might be. But because they don't have local ID, it's very difficult for them to access care or education or whatever it might be in these large cities. So part of what I was trying to do was mostly cost modeling to show that by providing different versions of care access, even in the large cities, they might be able to drop the overall cost of care and improve kind of like economic growth. So a lot of my interest was kind of in that realm for a while. And then I did a bunch of work kind of in like the tech community in Beijing and built an organization with some friends called Beijing Commons, which was focused on saying, hey, we have a number of folks working on interesting projects ranging from technology to policy to investing to education, whatever it might be. How do we really enable each other with our shared resources? So I built that out for a couple of years on the side, learned a lot about how different people were thinking about bringing technology into the social sector. And then, I don't know, I think things went on. I found myself drifting a bit further from the initial mission of expanding access to care. And a lot of personal things happened. I decided to make a move back to the United States and went to med school. I was like, well, this will be a fun way to kind of explore and not just kind of talk circles of medicine. And then, then I found myself in New York at Cornell. So, and then, there for a few years, took another leave to work on another AI project, which was a ton of fun and my first time really working on a technology project myself. Which kind of set the foundation for how I think a little bit about healthcare and AI and data now.
All right, so that kind of gets us to the question at hand, right? So AI is, let's see, ChatGPT is a year and almost a year and a half old. So although AI has been around for a long time, the OpenAI's launch of that sort of has now sprung into everybody's consciousness, and everybody's either waiting for utopia or the robot takeover, one of the two. So how did you get involved in AI, and what's your current role?
So currently, I finished my residency a year and a half ago, plus minus, maybe a little more than that. And I decided to work at Columbia per diem because a lot of my interest still kind of lies in understanding how do we bridge this gap between clinicians and people who are building a lot of these technologies to make sure we're kind of building in a safer and better way. I joined a group called South Park Commons. It's a pretty incredible community. They have taken me in and given me access to almost any resource I can imagine, whether it is engineers, whether it's educational programming, whether it is access to folks working in different organizations. And what they're really focused on is helping folks figure out what they want to work on next when they are in what they describe as the -1 to 0 phase. So before you have your very specific idea, and a lot of folks are founders starting the next tech company kind of a thing, but before you know your idea and are trying to raise funds, et cetera, their focus is saying, hey, can we help you figure out where you want to put your time and what matters to you? So I was like, well, this seems like a great path for me. I'm working clinically per diem, so I can kind of make this work and work almost full time on projects through South Park Commons, and join there. I think it's been pretty great for me because I had a foundation in some AI work because of my previous work at Human DX, but here I was able to kind of take some of those concepts, ask folks around me who are, I don't know, really thought leaders in these spaces from more traditional tech industries, and ask all of my questions. And people will take time out of their day just to walk me through a paper that I don't understand or a concept that I don't understand. And I found folks to kind of hack on very small projects with as I build my own understanding of what I want to work on. I've been doing it for about a year and a half. And I think around like the 6 month or 1 year mark, I started picking up some consulting projects that I was connected to, one of them through South Park Commons itself, for different organizations who are building tech startups in healthcare right now, who are trying to understand limitations or future directions of what they might want to build. And And I've also been working on a bit of my own project. So it's been fun.
So, like I said, there's kind of the excitement of AI and then the fear of AI. Mm-hmm. So within medicines, and maybe, I know emergency medicine may be a little too specific, but
Sure.
so what do you see, kind of being at the tech level ground spot? What do you see as the benefits, the amazing things, the things that are of concern? What's your view of the landscape right now?
I think it's an early technology, and technology is nothing more than a tool. And we as clinicians and practitioners have to be and patients, right? Our patient advocates have to be very involved in driving the future of where AI grows. And if we do it well, I think it can be a really, really beautiful thing and change what medicine is or healthcare is. For example, one project I'm working on right now, it is focused on really building better decision support for clinicians, but at the same time has the broader goal of understanding, can we expand healthcare literacy for our patients? So historically, I think what happens when you have a new fundamental technology is it allows you to really re-envision the paradigms through which we work today. And I think historically, medicine has been an extraordinarily paternalistic field because it inherently has to be so. There is so much information we learn through medical school, through residency, through our training and our practice, that when we see patients, the best we can do is take the 10, 15 minutes you have with each patient, try to explain what you're able to explain, and go on with your day. But we don't have time to really teach medicine to our patients because that would take years. And I think for the first time, we have a technology that might allow patients to interact with research in medicine the way that you and I know how to do, right? For example, I had a patient come in a few weeks ago, had a brain bleed, apparently wasn't taking his medications because his pressure was fine in the morning. But I think what he didn't realize is your morning blood pressures have very little to do with, or the medications you're taking have very little to do with the number at hand first thing in the morning. It has more to do with your numbers throughout the day. And a lot of these medications modulate your long-term renal function, which is then going to affect your blood pressure more long-term. But without that kind of an understanding, it's really hard to make decisions when your understanding of what's happening with a medication is much more concrete, right? And I think one thing I started explaining was this theory. And they were like, well, why didn't anyone tell us this? And my thought is, well, I wish that's what a primary care doctor was able to do, but I think primary care doctors are often slammed. And honestly, there should probably be a better infrastructure. We should probably be learning about how to think about medicines and healthcare at a much earlier stage. I don't know what that looks structurally like, but for me, what this meant was, well, how do I make my decisions? How do I learn medicine? I research. I use experts. I use people who were willing to take the time out of their day to teach me through school and residency. So part of my thought was, well, can I do the same thing? And can I model that with AI right now? So a couple of weeks ago, I was at South Park Commons OpenAI hackathon. And with a team of two incredible friends, we built a tool that does two things. One side of it is fine-tuning models to synthesize research the way clinicians synthesize research, or good academic clinicians synthesize research. So it's trying to train it to understand that infrastructure and say, this is how you go from a paper to something that's actually reasonable and usable. Because it's 72 different doctors. And what we learned was medical information is exponentially growing, doubling maybe every month or two at this point. But at the same time, after interviewing 72 clinicians, the median percentage of that research that people thought was usable was 7%, which tells you there is super low signal and exponentially growing information, and it's going to get harder and harder to stay on top of. And a part of this is this publish or perish mentality that we have in medicine. But a part of it is also the fact that we have increased technology infrastructure for things like research, right? But if I can't keep up with research beyond, listening to MRAP or reading a couple articles a month or whatever it might be, how are clinicians supposed to do it? And if clinicians can't do it, how are patients supposed to do it? Right?
Right. Well, and then on top of it, the data that we have is, or at least within emergency medicine, the retention of what we tell them is low. Even for people with PhD level things. Like, it's a stressful environment. It's a foreign language. Maybe they've had medications. There's a lot to consume, and just it's hard. It's hard to remember, and we've actually worked with a company called Medical Memory, and we're trying to integrate some of our EMR pieces with them. But it allows you to do a video recording at the discharge, so you can explain it so that they can listen to it later, because they're probably not going to retain, but maybe 15, 20%. I'm curious,
how do clinicians like that? Or do they like it? Do they not like it? Are they fearful of it?
There was some initial fear, because everybody's worried about medical legal implications. And we actually gave some example transcripts to a malpractice defense attorney, and she was like, please do this on every patient. This is fantastic. So,
okay. Yeah, I think it's helpful.
A little bit of a perception change, I think, for a lot, because initially the pushback was like, well, I don't want to be on camera saying something wrong, Yeah. But I do think your point is very valid. Like, the understanding of the patient of what's happening drives their compliance. And,
exactly.
I remember talking to patients, when they're like, oh, yeah, my doc started me on metformin, but I took it for 2 days and I didn't feel great, so I just stopped. It's like... Yeah, but you got to understand, like, it takes some time and everything's normalizing. But if you don't sit down and go through that with them, but you have a really valid point. Like, we don't, as ER doctors, we try to do what we can do. But I know I've got really good friends that are primary care guys, and they're just as busy as we are seeing patients. It's like, if there was a way through AI to kind of push that education and say, hey, watch this quick video, it will explain this, common things or whatever. That would be awesome. That would be really helpful.
I mean, I think the goal of what I'm building with this is saying, hey, can we help clinicians keep pace with research for one part of it, whether it's passive learning, active, question searching at the bedside. Which paralytic do I want to use for a patient with myasthenia? And I can't remember if it's rock or socks. And I want to look it up quickly and have an answer that makes sense. But I want very nuanced answers, and I want to be able to tap research and know that I can trust what I'm reading. So how do I build that? While only targeting the highest quality information and filtering out the rest automatically. But at the same time, if you can build it, what's incredible about large language models, but a lot of other types of AI models now as well, is we have the ability to translate across educational level, across language, right? And make what's accessible to us accessible to anybody. So can you help patients access research the same way that you and I know how?
So on your hackathon, are you using GPT-4 Turbo, or what's the base model?
Yeah, we were using GPT-4 Turbo for a bunch of it, GPT 3.5 and 4. We were trying different models around it. And ultimately, I don't know which way we'll go, whether we'll use a large model, whether we'll use a more small specific model. But we've been basically playing with a number of permutations of models and techniques for fine-tuning, et cetera. So one half of the project is more about like fine-tuning for research synthesis. But the other part, and this is crazy, and I think I didn't realize this, but I looked up a lot of answers to a lot of questions on tools like, well, I'm not going to start naming names. I think most of the tools out there, I think, are pretty incredible. But there's a number of organizations that are, kind of trying to say, hey, can we do something similar right now? And when you look at them, it's pretty good. But a lot of the answers are based off of clinical guidelines or medical society guidelines, which tend to be out of date. Or they are based on, and they're also a bit general. And it's also based on, primary medical research, which, and the indicators you can use for quality of research tend to be journal name, impact factor, citation count. But that's not great in medicine, right? It gets you so far. It gets you to 70, 80% fidelity of answers. It maybe creates a standard of care. But the question is, how do you get to that best level of care and that best decision, right? You ask these systems, how do you treat appendicitis? Or a simple appendicitis, and it'll tell you to get an appendectomy, where we now know that the best answer to that is antibiotics alone are actually non-inferior for a large number of cases. You ask, how do you treat the flu? And they'll point to Tamiflu because the Roche Tamiflu study is probably the most cited study on flu. And it's there and it shows up. But the fact is Tamiflu isn't a great medication that we probably shouldn't be using. How do you help people get to a more nuanced answer that's actually evidence-based, the way we were kind of trained to do, is my question. But it's what I did instead is I literally just interviewed a handful of, I had 48 hours to do this, and I'm going to build it out further. And I've been building it out further. But even as a starting super reductionist version of this product, I interviewed a number of clinicians that I trust deeply in terms of how they think about information, and modeled 14 layers deep clinical questions. 14 layers deep. What do you trust most to least? What's your model of trust for tons of permutations of different types of medical questions? And by literally codifying that, I can get to better answers. And that's crazy. All it says is that clinicians in our perspective is extraordinarily valuable for this other world. And we need to be able to kind of build this bridge and take clinicians and put them together with a lot of these engineers and folks who are building tools right now to build something more meaningful.
So what are you concerned about with AI?
So another project I'm closing out right now. It's a consulting project there are two people who, for their PhDs, they built a clinical language model based off of hospital center data from, I believe it's 7 hospital centers or maybe 9 hospital centers. They were having trouble figuring out where they want to monetize it and what their wedge was, and to turn this into a profitable company. And they decided they were going to verticalize and provide virtual care. They're very early right now. They have a couple of clinicians who are providing virtual visits, and their AI does things ranging from medical summarization to basic inbox management to a number of things. But one of the questions they had for me is, our clinicians are turning this off 80+% of the time. Why? And I talked to the clinicians, and a part of the answer is that what it does is it'll populate next possible diagnosis or next possible treatment consideration. And, the TLDR on what most people were finding is that the recommendations were either too general or too far left field. So you'll be talking to somebody with abdominal pain and they'll say, oh, did you consider biliary colic? And they're like, yes, I considered biliary colic. But then it would also say, hey, did you consider West Nile? And you're like, what? I'm like, sure, that might be related, but at the same time, that's not a first step in my diagnostic process for this patient. And whether or not this is true, I don't know. But a lot of the clinicians felt that they now have to defend why it's not that, because it's populating their note and it's populating their record, and they want to make sure they are now defending why it's none of these answers.
Right.
And from a machine learning perspective, yeah, this is human feedback, and you can use it to train your model. From a clinician perspective, this isn't terribly useful, and it's an extra 3 minutes per patient that I could spend just focusing on my patient instead.
Yeah.
And it's kind of hard, right? There's a critical gap. But more importantly, I got to play with the models that they were using. One was their own homegrown model on this data. They built a model from scratch on these 7 hospital centers. And the other one was, I think it was GPT-3.5, but I don't remember exactly, that was fine-tuned on the same data set. And one thing I started to do, and a part of my hypothesis has historically been that using health record data for clinical decision support is not the best way to go. I think it's fine to predict hospital readmissions or care utilization trends. That being said, it's not the best way to understand whether I should get an ultrasound or a CAT scan for a patient, because all we can do is look at historical trends in how care has been practiced and then try to recommend the same thing. So one thing that I did is I took this model, and I took both of them actually, and I made a few hundred permutations of patients, changing variables like age, sex, time of day, type of hospital, all sorts of things. And I would prompt it with the same 28 clinical questions and look for differences in recommendations. So, sometimes you get things that are relatively concordant and you're like, great. Some are just kind of like these weird variations that I haven't had time to dive into deeply. But certain things, for example, for a Black woman with pelvic pain overnight, it would recommend a CAT scan instead of an ultrasound, which is interesting because 3 of us know that an ultrasound is probably the better study to start with for, I think it was a 30-some-year-old Black woman with pelvic pain. But it recommends a CAT scan. And for most other demographics and most other times of day, et cetera, it'll recommend an ultrasound. And since we're not using interpretable models, since these are black box models, all we can do is say, okay, cool, we know it's different. And only if you know to ask and look for that critical nuance can you make a smart and careful decision. I figured out why this is happening, or at least why I think this is happening, by calling the hospitals and radiology departments and learned that 2 of the 3 hospitals that have the highest proportion of both low income and Black women have no overnight ultrasound tech. So overnight, they get CAT scan. And what we're doing is we're codifying our structural care patterns into decision support by using data that exists, but not using the right data, right? The fact is data is not biased. There's no such thing as biased data, but data can be biased if used out of context. And what we're doing is we're taking EHR data, which is predominantly billing and coding data and ledgers of what we've done under our structural environment, and using that out of context to say this is the best in class decision. And we shouldn't be doing that. Nice. And I think we have to think a lot about what data we use, how and why, if we want to build something that's really, really safe and thoughtful and not going to leave the 5% of our population that's already disenfranchised in the dust.
All right. Yeah, it's
a lot of information.
It's a fascinating space. We hired a programmer ourselves and are using a large language model, commercially available through an API to listen to your conversation with the patient and then transcribe a chart in a certain format. And and most of the time it works fantastically, right? And we had to tweak it. Like you have to dial the temperature down because you want consistent. I don't want it to be creative. I'm not looking for creative thought in this. But and I know we're early on, but so I'm a little on the excited side because I'm seeing, what we have access to now through some of these LLMs that are opening up with APIs, and it'll be interesting to see what some of the open source stuff does as well. But it's impressive, and one thing that we saw, and I think I've mentioned this to some other people, that there was a physician that saw a lady who was like 10 days postpartum. Joel, was it somewhere in there? And and had symptoms that you would think fit with preeclampsia, and he missed it. And he's a good guy, good doc, and he's busy, and when we're doing the case review, he's like, it didn't even come up on my differential, right?
Yeah.
And then we basically punched the same case through, just replicated the conversation and put it through the AI, and there it is. Please consider preeclampsia. This 80% chance, blah blah blah.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's super important and super valuable. If we do it well, it's going to change the way we get to practice medicine. Clinicians are going to get to focus on the things that we are best at and we really want to do, which is interpreting information, understanding information, delivering it to a patient. A lot of the clinical studies that have looked at physicians versus these ML models for diagnostic ability, what they look at is it really depends how you define diagnosis, right? They are the hardest part of any question generally is structuring your problem.
Right.
Once you can structure a problem, most problems that are solvable are pretty easy to solve. But the question is, how do you structure that problem? Right. Most of these studies that I've seen so far will take a number of facts about a patient and put it together and say, hey, we're going to give it to a bunch of clinicians, we're going to give it to a bunch of ML models and see who gets a better diagnosis or who's more accurate. One issue is that the way we practice in medicine is we are super specialized, and emergency doctors tend to be less specialized, right? Or specialized in some things, but also generalist. That being said, I'm not the right person to ask about the nuances of leishmaniasis. Like, I just don't know. Whereas an ML model has an incredible knowledge base where it's going to be able to answer those questions.
Right.
But the other thing that's hard is I'm not used to looking at structured, key, factual, objective information in a ledger and saying, let's go from A to B. What my value is going from a patient. The way, the 3 of us could go see a patient and all come back with a slightly different story and have a different version of facts. I think understanding the facts and speaking to a patient, understanding what's relevant is actually the really hard part about being a clinician. And I think that is what I want to be able to focus more time on, and then use tools like LLMs to better help me understand what does this mean and make sure I'm not missing things. And then the next layer of that is how do you translate that back to a patient as well, right? I don't know where I'm going with that, but just a thought.
Yeah, and and the other thing with emergency medicine specifically is we're kind of thinking about this is, to train a model, you need a closed loop, right? And a lot of what we have is I may come up with a diagnosis, and let's say it's a complicated, thing, and I send them off with a presumptive diagnosis, and they're going to a specialist. I never get verification of was I right or was I wrong on my presumption. They go off and maybe you see them again by chance, but so closing that, were your presumptions correct? Yes, no, and then feeding that back. That is absent in our particular specialty.
Yeah, and if there's a way to learn, it makes us better, right? As humans or as models.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think what all this to say, we can build something really beautiful, but we have to be very thoughtful about how we build it from the beginning, because otherwise, it might be fine for 80% of people or 90% of people. But the question is that enough? And does it make it worse for the other 10%? So the question is, let's build it well from the get-go.
All right. So I've got two questions then. Let's say you're just a rank and file, like I go to work, I go home, you're not in charge of a big, healthcare organization. You're not playing. You're just a regular doc doing his job or her job, day in, day out. What would you tell them about preparing for AI or resources that they can use today to help them?
I'd say be cautiously optimistic. Use tools, but evaluate it and stress it yourself. I think clinicians with their experience and training have an ability to really think about what might be hardest and what might break. So try to break everything and see what works and what doesn't work. When you're using something, just be mindful of what it is and be thoughtful about the outputs you're getting. Use it to advise you, use it to get more information, to get another perspective, but don't use technology blindly or trust technology blindly, especially when it comes to high stakes questions. If you're using an AI model to help you write a pre-auth letter or low stakes inbox management, sure, that stuff is probably going to be fine because it's relatively low stakes. But when you get to your higher stakes questions, make sure you are stress testing it, but keep trying, right? Just because it fails once doesn't mean it's going to fail next time. Just because one tool fails, it doesn't mean all tools are bad. I think it's also dangerous to look at something and say, oh, this doesn't work, I'm not going to use AI again, because AI is more than one thing. It's like saying I found a bad web page on the internet. I don't like it, so I'm not using the internet again. I think we have to understand how to assess things, evaluate them. And if you have a thought, share. I think most people who are building really care and want to build something good. So message them and tell them what you're finding and help people make things better.
Yeah. Are there tools that you see physicians using outside of what's provided from, a large software vendor or whatever currently?
That are like deeply AI rooted?
Yeah. Because I'm wondering, there was Google as a way of trying to find information or whatever. And now there's AI. So I wonder, are you seeing physicians using, Claude or OpenAI or one of these to...
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I see a lot of folks using Claude, OpenAI, Perplexity, all of these kinds of tools for general questions and answers. And then there's more medicine-specific ones, right? In a similar vein to the project I was telling you about that I've been building. There is AvoMD, there's Open Evidence, there's a whole host of these organizations that are trying to do decision support that are also pretty great, but none of them are perfect. It's kind of what I was telling you, right? Like everything is so good, but the question is, how do you get great?
Right. And
there are great for very specific purposes. It just depends what you're using it for. If you're using some of these tools to build a standard of care and to set a foundation to say, this is where we want to practice, that's actually pretty wonderful and important. It just make sure you're using tools for what they're intended.
Right. I think it's interesting because it's I don't think anybody would assume that it's reasonable for me to say you have to be 100% as a human. You have to be 100% accurate 100% of the time with all patients. Right. That's just an impossibility.
We can't.
And these tools are based off of human knowledge and experience, and so I think that'll be reflected in the tool. So if it gets it wrong 3% of the time, so the question I have to ask is that a better accuracy than me? Like, would I miss it less than 3% of the time, or would I miss it more than 3% of the time?
I think it's a bit of a broad question, though, right? The question is, where are we missing that 3%? Are we missing that 3% on white males? Or are we missing that 3% exclusively on Black women? Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. And that's a super, super important question. We're going to still miss things. But the fact is, when we're codifying things into rule, or into technology recommendations, we need to be much more clear and thoughtful. I mean, this kind of also launches you into the understanding of things like explainability, right? There was a great paper that came out. I don't actually remember the nuances of it, but basically it's a concept of there was an ML model looking at x-rays, chest x-rays, and can predict with reasonable accuracy when a patient has heart failure. And don't quote me on this, I just don't remember the details, but can predict with reasonable accuracy when a patient's respiratory distress or shortness of breath or something is coming from heart failure. And what this researcher found was that the model was looking at a pacemaker on the patient rather than anything else. But the question is, that's correlational, right? What happens if you take a pacemaker and put it on a person with a COPD exacerbation or with a lung down and a pneumothorax? Is it going to tell me it's heart failure? We need to be able to understand why models are making their decisions for high stakes decisions. We need to be really, really thoughtful about causality and logic if we want to be able to use these. And the fact is, you and I, we might make 3% of the or we might make mistakes 3% of the time, or even more. Who knows? But that 3% is based off of logical reasoning rather than correlational reasoning purely, right? And that's different.
I hope. I would hope that.
And I'm sure we use both, but we try. I think evidence-based medicine is about trying to use causational reasoning when and however possible.
Yeah.
Right. That's our gold standard that we strive for and try to get better and better and move towards.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious to see how do you guys think about these questions?
Yeah, it's tough. Because finding flaws can be really challenging. Right, like you said, these are a lot of black box things, and it's like, just from a low level thing, it's like kind of like you said, I give it data and I look back and see, all right, what did I get? Is it reasonable? Is it what I would expect? Or does it seem to be off the wall? I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing, but like I said, I want to be cautious and not take it as gospel truth.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot that we can't really replace in what we do, at least anytime in the near term. So we have to be mindful that these are tools to aid us and nothing more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Well, Sumanth, I appreciate the time. And,
yeah, for sure.
And the insight.
This was a ton of fun.
Yeah. So, are there any projects that you have that are out on the web that people can come look at, or are you still kind of in early development?
One of them they're both in early development. I'm very much figuring out where I want to put my time and go heads down right now. So I'm working on small consulting projects and little projects here and there, mostly with the intent of learning, until I decide that one of these projects is where I put my full focus. So,
all right.
Yeah.
We'll have to keep an eye out. If you find your passion, your one focus, you'll have to reach back out to us so we can
for sure.
dive into
I think we should definitely keep this conversation going. I'm super excited, and I'd love to learn even more about what the tools you are building are, how they work, where some of these things fit in. So I think we'll have a lot of fun conversations to come.
All right. Well, I appreciate it.
All right. You guys have a great day.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Don't hang up.
Oh.
All right. I'll cut it off with that point. But hey, if you've got contests, we have a web-based EMR that we developed for our freestanding here in Texas, and it's got a template language we can change the content and what are the questions asked. I think if there are NGOs or whatever that are doing volunteer medical work and they need an EMR, I would love to do something where I can give it to them either for free or something, just a minimal cost.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't worked in that space in a little bit now, but I mean, I can definitely keep my mind open around it because there are a bunch of folks who are constantly building around me.
Okay.
So, I mean, if do you guys have demos or something you can share potentially that I'd be able to take a look?
Yeah, I can email you something.
That would be great. I'd love to take a look at it, better understand what it is, and that way, as I have more and more conversations, I can at least point it in the direction of folks who could use it potentially.
Okay. Yeah, I just realized it's there's no scheduling because it's emergency medicine, so it's not like build appointments. But if you just want to have something simple to create a record that you can access from anywhere, well, anywhere that's got an internet connection. But
there's 2 folks internationally that come to mind, but I haven't worked on international projects like this in a very long time. But there are 2 folks, and one that I've been meaning to get back in touch with her, just for fun, honestly. But I'd love to at least float it to them too.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah. And feel free, if there's anything else I can do to help you guys out, I'd be excited to see what you guys are working on. And I'm always happy to kind of share some perspective. So you guys let me know.
Perfect. I'll email you our AI scribe thing, and you can play with it and give me warnings or feedback.
Yeah, for sure. It sounds like a really cool tool. I think, I give you my skepticisms of some of these tools, right? This is exactly what I was skeptical about with the other group that was doing it. That being said, my skepticism shouldn't mean that we shouldn't be building this. It just means we have to be thoughtful about what we're using to build.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and like I said, I know that there's a lot of smart people working. Like hopefully this will continue to improve and get better and better,
Yeah.
So it's just like any early technology, although this isn't necessarily early. People work on this forever, but
but it is still early, right? That's what's fun about it right now.
Yeah.
I mean, we're a year in, and look where we've gone from, I don't know, GPT 2.5 or 3 to where we sit today, and Sora coming in a few months where I can create never-ending video. Like, that's nuts.
Yeah, those Sora videos are unbelievable.
Yeah.
My brother's giving a lecture today on AI. He's a computer engineer, and one of the questions the audience gave in advance is like, how can you tell the difference between an AI-generated video and a human, and so he's got several that he got from Sora's site, and he's going to be like, all right, tell me, is this real or is this AI? Is this real or is this AI? They're all AI, but people aren't, like, they're not going to be able to tell.
Yeah. There's a couple folks I know who are using these open models instead right now, and what they're doing is they're finding ways that you can actually break into the model and change it. So a skateboarder is going left, you can stop it and find that point at which it's going left to make it turn right instead. And what that does is that allows you to create infinite generative video games. But what that means to me is, if you're able to control generative video like that, can we create infinite generative patient simulation? There's just so many things we can start doing.
Oh, yeah. That would be cool for education. That would be amazing.
The world of education and medicine is about to flip on itself, and it's
I know.
really
and then put the Apple Vision Pro on where you see it in 3D.
Yeah, you're there.
Yeah. A question: how do you guys balance practice and working on this stuff now? This is something I'm trying to figure out myself. I've decided to go per diem because it's the only way I can A, protect my intellectual property, but B, own my schedule and have the time to work on other things. But I'm always looking for advice if there's better ways to do this.
No, it's tough. Early stage is tough, right? Because you're burning the candle at both ends.
And I'm self-thinking right now because I haven't figured out where I'm putting my time, and I don't want to raise capital yet. It's not really my to build a company, frankly. I'd rather work for good, smart people on the right project. But as I do this, I'm trying to figure out how I want to structure my time and my commitments.
Yeah, that's time management is tricky. I didn't learn some tricks until much later in life, and that even and I hired an executive coach, which was helpful. But my clinical time is less than Joel. Joel's, how many shifts do you work per month, Joel?
Well, it depends on the month. I've cut back a little bit, but I'm usually in the 2 to 4 range. But the last few months I haven't been quite up there. But my biggest thing is I'm not a AI genius or anything like this. I'm more of the guy that's hearing about it and then going into shift and hearing the docs that are like, oh, this is going to take our jobs, and all the there's a whole subset of the world that's like panicked about this because they don't know enough about it.
Yeah.
And I heard I was talking to Matt Lundgren, this guy that's with Microsoft, and he said, the best way I can think about it, because he's an interventional radiologist, but he said the best way I can think about it is this would be like a pilot when they say, hey, this is some new technology we got called GPS, and it'll show you where you are. And he's like, it's a wonderful tool that's going to revolutionize travel, but don't forget to look out the window too. Like, don't forget to look at where you are he's like, forever we've been flying planes by sight in medicine. You know, we've been just kind of looking and going, this is what my gut feeling is. But he's like, now we're getting these new tools as we develop them. And so I've been using that like example a little bit with the docs, and they like that. That seems to resonate with them a little bit, that it's a tool that can be used. I like what you were saying about like kind of this real-time decision support. Because we have these policies, right? But who, you know, it's in the moment, you don't have time to like read through a 15-page ASEP policy on whatever it is, you know?
Sometimes I might, but like often I need to make a decision quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
My
even so that would anticipate, like,
I was like, shit, which one can I not use? And it was just like in my head, and I was, I don't see that many patients with myasthenia who I need to tube instantly, and I was like, crap.
Exactly.
And luckily, I just
something like it would decision support it and say, this patient has this in their history, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah, exactly.
Well, and what I'm hoping to add in, and we'll get cut off here in a couple minutes, but what I'm hoping to add into ours is image analysis, because we've been testing it on rashes, and it's been fairly accurate with what I've been feeding it. So I'm encouraged. It's not perfect, but it's been pretty good, better than me. And then to have a chat bot where you can chat the chart, the specific for the patient. Like, there's a small apical pneumo. You know, how long do I need to keep them on oxygen? You know, in the ED, when it's safe to discharge them, and have it be able to tell you.
Yeah.
You know,
and be able to look and just be like, hey, do I even need to put pigtail on this, or can I just let it be?
Right.
Like,
yeah, exactly.
That matters. And to be able to look at an image and say, hey, this is a 10% whatever pneumo, and for this the data shows A, B, and C, is going to be game changing.
Yeah.
I'm working on the second half of building that data pipeline to understand what's the best quality data and research we should use for that decision. But the image analysis is going to be tremendous.
Yeah. Well, if the Google just shuts off after an hour, I'm going to thank you very much for your time. But
yeah. Well, let me know if I can be of help. Let's keep the conversation going. And yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was great meeting you.
Yeah.
You guys too.
Thanks for the time.
Have a good one.
All right.
Thank you for your time. All right. We'll see you later.
Bye.